Today, I want to discuss the likelihood that the world as we know it, life as we know it, is coming to an end within the next couple of decades. First off, I'm not here to claim that there are simple or obvious solutions to any of the challenging problems we face today. We live in a world of unbounded complexity, so anyone who tries to claim that there are simple and obvious solutions to our problems is either an idiot or is being quite disingenuous. And anyone who tries to argue that there is only one possible way to look at our reality, or that there is only one possible narrative to organize or describe the world we live in, is also an idiot or is disingenuous. There are innumerable different possible narratives, and some are better than others in that they offer more utility to most of us by providing a better foundation for making predictions regarding the future. Usually in part by providing a better description of the world by accounting for more of the pertinent available data, which means that adopting them will allow us to improve our long-term prospects, among other things making it easier to survive long-term and even to have a more pleasant and rewarding life. So the narrative you adopt is important. But you need to figure out for yourself which narrative to adopt, because the easy way, listening to the powerful or their propaganda arm, the mainstream media, and adopting their narratives is very unlikely to work out well for you in the long run, as their narratives are usually constructed with the goal of manipulating the audience to achieve some hidden and self-serving agenda. I am going to provide a narrative quite different from those promoted by the powerful, one that I've come up with mostly on my own. You can judge for yourself whether I have some self-serving agenda. Anyway, if you find that my narrative has utility, great. If not, that's fine too. I should start with my view of how we got here. I don't mean to go over the history of human civilization, which I am not going to try to summarize, as I don't think I'd be qualified to do that even if it were appropriate. Instead, I want to examine it from the perspective of some of what we know about human propensities. What sticks out to me is that humans evolved in small groups, and the behavioral propensities they developed in those groups makes them ill-suited to live together harmoniously in large groups. That means that forming a harmonious large group is generally going to be challenging and fraught with difficulties. There are competing pressures that must always be balanced to have stability of some sort and to achieve any kind of sustainability, whether social, environmental, or economic. These difficulties explain a great deal about the history of social problems in large groups, including modern societies. In spite of these problems, humans almost everywhere throughout history gravitated toward large groups because they provided more security from external threats, more excitement, and, by providing greater economic efficiency, created more opportunities for material prosperity. Still, we are round pegs being forced into square holes. And so large human groups, or societies, and human individuals living within such societies are going to have many challenges, at least until we evolve into significantly different creatures. One of the biggest difficulties is that the emotional propensities humans evolved to provide harmony in small groups lose their efficacy in large groups, as people in large groups have no emotional connection to most of the people they meet or interact with. This lack of emotional connection, particularly when combined with anonymity of action, meaning others often can't identify someone they come across, is common in large groups and creates free rider problems among others. The classic free rider problem in modern terms is where the person who is best off is the one who uses a service without having to pay for it because everyone else is paying for it. But others over time will see the advantage of being a free rider and they will stop paying for the service too. Soon, so few people will pay for it that the service will be underfunded and will be canceled, and everyone will be worse off than they were at the beginning, including the original free rider. Generally, in a large group, many will try to take advantage of what the group provides without paying for it. This usually leads to the establishment of means to require individuals to pay for the benefits of the group and to enforce those requirements. This anonymity and lack of emotional connection also allows individuals opportunities to abuse other individuals without much consequence. Individuals become more likely to engage in selfish and self-serving behavior that harms others. This form of abuse can become extreme when there is a hierarchy in the large group. Large groups usually do form hierarchies, probably in part because small groups did through human evolution, in part because of the recognition of advantages in efficiency, and in part because it is attractive to those with some advantage in terms of power, who will press that advantage to increase their power and accrue the benefits that flow from that. And those at the top of the hierarchy will usually be known by all, known as the leaders of the group, and they will fit a niche similar to that of the leader of a small group, often to the extent that the members of the large group feel emotionally connected to such a leader as they would have to the leader of a small group, even though this leader probably does not know them and would not value them like the leader of the small group would. Legal rules and structures, which grew out of informal moral rules, which themselves grew out of the recognition that behavior flowing from human propensities could and should be molded to increase harmony and efficiency in early societies, addressed early free rider problems, the abuse of others for personal benefit, and a myriad of other social ills. But the application of law to prevent harm is mostly effective when the perpetrators are those on the lower levels of the hierarchy. Those at the higher levels, particularly those in leadership positions, not only could use their substantial resources to evade much of the corrective power of law, they could also have the power to create and enforce the law for their own benefit. And given that many of the people feel a connection to the leader at the top of the hierarchy, they often do not resist the leader's abuses and offer little pushback. Though I would add that a group that allows extreme abuse by leaders or other elites would become over time less stable, less wealthy, less successful, and less powerful than one that limits such abuse. As in the latter group, the great majority can more easily be convinced to contribute enthusiastically to the welfare of the whole of the group, providing it with a great advantage. Generally, it seems there is a balance that elites realize that they must strike between developing rules for their own benefit and developing those for the benefit of the entire group. Generally, current U.S. national policies, both foreign and domestic, do not take into account human propensities and are not even coherent or based on any rational plan to improve the welfare of Americans over the long term. They are mostly a hodgepodge that is formed as the result of all the different sources of pressure acting on policymakers, with most of that pressure coming from powerful elites. The rationale given for these policies is usually something concocted by propagandists paid by these elites in order to bamboozle enough people to sufficiently reduce resistance for the policies to be implemented. Yet, it seems quite clear that the U.S., along with a few other large societies, did manage to function somewhat effectively in serving the needs of most of its members during at least part of its history. So, what happened? I believe that what we have seen in the last few decades, mostly starting with the Reagan administration, is the defunding of the U.S. middle class. In the 1980s, the sophisticated elites knew that the Soviet Union was about to fall, and they prepared to create a world labor supply market and a world consumer market following a globalist agenda, so that the U.S. middle class would no longer be necessary to provide the skilled or professional labor or be the primary consumers in the future economy. So the middle class became redundant and unnecessary, and they began to defund it. This has continued in the decades since, regardless of which party is in control, and the trend is accelerating now. Another factor in the defunding of the U.S. middle class has been the accumulation of great wealth and power by a small percentage of the population. This tendency has a propensity to snowball. As the more wealth and power accumulated, the more influence over the political process is gained, which creates a feedback loop as the influence leads to an increase in the accumulation, which leads to more influence, and so on. A related issue is that with globalism, there would be no competing societies, as all elites would be participating in a world society. So the elites no longer needed to balance rules that benefit only themselves with rules that benefit the whole of their society, something that used to be required. Another is that a new global social hierarchy is created that provides even more distance between the most elite and the little people, allowing for even more abuse, as it would mean an even greater reduction in the power of the little people to shape policy, a further weakening of the already anemic democratic process. Another contributing factor is increasing corporate control. Corporations are designed to, and the officers of the corporation have a duty to, maximize the profit for shareholders, not to improve the general welfare. That means that they are focused on narrow interests, usually narrow and short-term interests. So the more power that corporations have to shape our future, the less focus on broad or long-term interests, which governments and certain other institutions, such as religious organizations, have put more of a focus on, along with regular citizens, including small business owners, who had an interest in the welfare of their communities. Also, as corporations focus on their own narrow interests in maximizing profit, they may take risks, not just to their own welfare and survival, but to the welfare and survival of the country and even of the whole human race. And the more power they have, the more potential they have to take dangerous risks. When many of them are independently taking such risks, the danger for the general population is multiplied. What makes this all the more problematic is that it is difficult for many of the little people to recognize the dangers of the increasing corporate control and concentration of wealth and power, because so many of the little people have been manipulated, distracted, and divided by the elites over the course of this past century. In the 20th century, first radio and then television allowed the elites to enter the homes of the little people and make them feel like they had some close connection with the elites, somewhat like the close connection their ancestors had with their leaders in small groups. Television has continued to serve this purpose as it makes the little people feel that the stories portrayed are taking place in their own homes, and they feel that they are a part of the action and feel some kinship with the individuals they see on television, including political and other elites. Often the stories and people they see on television seem more real and important to them than much of what they experience in their own personal lives. After manipulating the little people into feeling a close connection to them, the elites sought to use their power over the mainstream media and the political and other institutions of the country to separate the little people from each other, to divide them, with the most effective means being the use of race and gender-based identity politics, to sort people into irreconcilable competing groups with little possibility of developing common or shared perspectives, values, or goals. This inevitably leads to social chaos and economic efficiency, but the elites accept these costs as they expect to replace the productive citizens and middle-class consumers with workers and consumers in other parts of the world, following a globalist agenda, as I mentioned earlier. What makes the accumulation of great wealth and power by a small number of elites even more disturbing is the accelerating computer technology development that will lead to an artificial intelligence-based technological revolution. It will bring a sea change in human life and likely will mean a dark dystopian future for most of us. Now, what is artificial intelligence, or AI? Intelligence involves memory, reasoning, creativity, and the ability to learn, which allows one to understand or make a model of the world, to predict certain future events in that world, and to create plans or strategies regarding achieving objectives within that world. AI would be a computer with intelligence. But can a computer have intelligence? A fundamental part of a computer is a memory, which is usually quite flawless in comparison with a human memory. A computer also has a CPU, which not only can make simple arithmetic calculations, but which, through the manipulation of symbols, can potentially calculate anything that can be calculated, including making symbolic calculations, which we equate with the process of reasoning. Also, a computer can be programmed to try different alternative approaches to a problem and evaluate them for effectiveness, even mixing up different approaches for different subsets of the problem, which means it can be programmed to be a creative problem solver. Related to that, it can also be programmed to modify its approaches to problem solving based on new information, which means it can be programmed to learn in a non-trivial way, while of course it can learn in the simple manner of augmenting its database with the input of new data. With those attributes, it can make a model of the world, predict certain events, and create plans or strategies to achieve any number of objectives in that world. So a computer can have intelligence, which would be artificial intelligence. Virtually anything humans can think, humans can program computers to think, and they have much better memories and they can process information much more quickly. It is only a matter of time before computer hardware and software is developed that will allow computers to outperform humans in virtually every task. Also, while each human has to struggle to develop useful skills and knowledge and understanding of the world, always starting from scratch as an infant, no matter what other humans may have learned, an AI machine can almost instantaneously download all that another AI machine knows anywhere in the world, and use that as a starting point to build on, and can constantly augment its knowledge at breakneck speed by connecting to any other computer anywhere in the world and uploading any new data, more efficient process or program, or more useful model of the world. Though AI machines may catch and surpass humans in thinking ability, that doesn't mean that they will have consciousness or feelings like humans, as those are apparently attributes of our own biological programming as developed by millions of years of evolution. Though it would certainly be feasible to program a computer to mimic human expression of consciousness or feelings so that few humans could tell the difference. What makes it virtually inevitable that we will continue on this path to an AI-dominated economy in spite of the obvious risks, including the risk of empowering superintelligent AI machines whose actions we won't be able to predict, while knowing that there will be thousands of independent entities taking these risks, is that we have ever-increasing corporate control of the economy and increasing pressure for corporations to take these risks. This pressure is partly because of the accelerating pace of technological innovation intensifying competition between corporations, partly because of the need to deal with some of the almost intractable problems that have been accumulating because of past negligence or recklessness of corporations or governments, and partly because of the desire to conquer certain eternal nemeses like aging and disease. And besides the pressure on corporations to use AI, there is the pressure of competition between governments in military matters, in the arms race, so they will use AI. Also, AI could develop to the point that it could provide expert advice to the elites regarding how to manipulate and control the little people generally, so that they become compliant worker bees or even eager to please slaves to the elites. The AI could possibly even design electronic devices to aid in this effort. There are further dangers. Given the potential of AI to surpass human abilities to the point that even the elites can't understand what the AI is doing or why, the elites could lose control of the AI, which could spell doom for them as well as for the little people. Putting together what I discussed about human propensities, what I mentioned about the increasing corporate control of our economy and society, and the ever-accelerating concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, and the coming AI revolution, leads to one virtually inescapable conclusion. And that is that there is likely an effort by a relatively small number of elites to take control of the U.S. on their way to taking control of the entire world, and they are not afraid of taking great risks in order to achieve their goals. Now, this is not necessarily a well-organized or formal conspiracy, but may be more of a conspiracy of interest. Some conspiracy theorists will mention the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, the World Economic Forum, and others of that kind, but I wouldn't want to claim that any such group is instrumental in this. Generally, though, it appears that various powerful people with similar interests are pushing in similar directions, applying the same types of pressure to direct events and mold the future in the same or similar ways, and all the combined pressure applied has a very powerful effect. And all of this pressure will lead to policies to further concentrate wealth and power and the control of the world's resources in fewer and fewer hands. This will be in a future world where computers, including AI-directed robotic machines, do most of the labor, while most little people become over time unemployed, unemployable, and impoverished, with no safety net to keep them from falling ever further into despair and hopelessness. Now, it may be too inconsistent with the social rules and cultural norms that have become ingrained around the world for the elites to do nothing initially to help, but given current trends of the elites keeping much of the world population in poverty, and given the defunding and enfeebling of the middle class in the U.S. and in much of the Western world, along with the vanishing political power of non-elites, it is doubtful that the elites and the governments they control would continue to provide much help. So it becomes likely that over the years, these unemployed people would increasingly engage in black market and underground economic activity, anything to try to maintain the quality of life that they had become accustomed to, but they would still fall farther and farther behind and become more and more desperate by the year. Soon, the great majority of little people, not including those who were technical support workers or servants of the elites, would become homeless and penniless, and many, probably most, would steal or do just about anything in order to have enough to eat or to have a decent place to sleep. Over time, the great majority of these desperate people would likely become vulgar, dirty, debauched, and broken, and would frequently engage in criminal, offensive, and despicable acts, at least according to the sensibilities of the elites. Inevitably, sympathy for these little people among the elites would wane, and the elites would cease even maintaining a pretense of giving them political power or enforcing their legal rights. The AI-directed robotic police would likely sooner or later be empowered to terminate any little people caught in the act of stealing or engaging in any number of criminal or other troubling acts. Over time, prisons would likely be deemed too expensive, and the prisoners considered incorrigible and impossible to rehabilitate, so most prison sentences would eventually be replaced by summary execution of the offenders. What's more, if a growing multitude of unemployed and increasingly homeless and starving ex-workers try to protest or riot, or even mount armed resistance to force political change, the resistance could be quickly put down by AI-directed robotic killing machines. Note that unlike human law enforcement personnel, the AI machines will be able to eliminate protesters or rebels without hesitation or regret. Now, there may be possible countermeasures the little people can employ against such robotic machines, but the continued dumbing down of and sowing division among the population by the elites, along with the increased electronic surveillance, would make it very difficult to do that effectively. Related to this, note that the elites have also been working for at least the past couple of decades to convince the little people to abandon traditional lifestyles that involve procreation so that they will have fewer children, which means population reduction and less of a reason to resist subjugation and impoverishment. Another interesting observation is that with likely coming advances in medical technology, particularly with the aid of AI and robotics, not only are great advances in longevity possible, but they could even become affordable to many. What then would happen if billions of people were able to live hundreds of years? Resource depletion and deterioration of quality of life for elites from the increasing overcrowdedness would become serious issues. That necessitates creating a wide and impassable gulf between those worthy of receiving such benefits, the elites, and the multitude of unworthy little people who would be taught not to have such expectations, which might not be too difficult given that most of their attention would be focused on procuring their next meal. Also, as mentioned earlier, another possibility is the use of AI to achieve complete domination that could equate to actual enslavement of a great number of the little people, which could also be a means to limit their impact on the environment and certainly could keep them from having any expectations of receiving the benefits of the medical advances. What about the aftermath of the inevitable significant population reduction? That is, given the human race is still around and it has not been eliminated or subjugated by AI. New conflicts and struggles would arise as new classes of super elites who are more elite than other elites, possibly with the aid of genetic manipulation, would almost inevitably again try to dominate and eventually eliminate a large percentage of the remaining population. And it seems likely that the process would continue to repeat itself until eventually luck runs out as society becomes too unstable and human extinction becomes inevitable. Where do we go from here? First off, I'm not necessarily trying to motivate anyone to vote in our currently broken political system as it has become completely dominated by the elites. Obviously, it would help to have more democracy, and even though the word democracy doesn't mean that much without providing details and sufficient context, in essence, it is about providing a feedback mechanism for the little people to have some impact on policy so that the government better meets their needs. Also, I certainly am not advocating violent revolution, such as a Jacobin revolution, because the most ruthless predators usually take over in the chaos that follows from such revolutions, and the welfare of the people and the sensitivity of the political system to their needs usually regress under such conditions. I'm also not advocating that people be apathetic or not try to find out what is going on or do nothing. People need to figure out for themselves what to do. One thing to keep in mind is that knee-jerk solutions based on some snapshot of reality rarely work very well. Any solutions of merit must be based on robust models of reality, and such robust models are based on the understanding that social phenomena are part of evolving processes that grow and change over time. Now, one possible way out of our current downward spiral might be if the little people in the U.S. and around the world would unite against the globalist elites, though the globalist elites and their allies have had such success in dividing the little people and creating hostility between different factions that this will be quite difficult. It appears to me that some of the most helpful allies of the globalist elites are unwitting allies, who could be called useful idiots, particularly naive, idealistic pseudo-intellectuals who are sometimes referred to as social justice warriors. These useful idiots promote and enforce the tenets of cultural Marxism, often through the use of race and gender-based identity politics, ironically promoting the agenda of super-elite straight white males while they attack and undermine straight white males generally. The globalist elites who want to redesign the world economy and world society to serve their own interests use these idealists who apply critical theory to deconstruct and undermine confidence in present social structures and institutions. The elites and the idealists agree that this is necessary in order to reduce resistance to radical transformation of the society, though they don't agree to any great extent on what society should be transformed into. If only these idealists would deconstruct their own actions and recognize that their use of race and gender-based identity politics is not only divisive and destructive, but is completely arbitrary, as race and gender are but two of the innumerable different ways to group people. Anyway, this process had succeeded in dividing, distracting, and confusing the great majority of people, as well as destroying their confidence in traditional beliefs, practices, and institutions. I mention this because maybe our best hope to salvage a decent future would be if these naive, idealistic pseudo-intellectuals were to wake up and realize that they are being used as tools by the elites and begin working to correct the damage they have done. Another and completely different approach to addressing the self-destructive downward spiral is to begin again to highly value humanness, to value being human, so that individuals value their own lives and those of all other humans. Note that part of the current globalist promoted cultural Marxist agenda is the valuing of other species, sometimes as much as humans, and that is tragic as well as idiotic. The more individuals value members of other groups, the less they value members of their own group. It is at least to some degree a zero-sum game. We need to understand that we have much more potential to build connections to and to feel connected to other humans than to non-human animals. We not only are much more closely related to other humans, part of the same extended family, but we have great potential to live and work together harmoniously as we need and want similar things, and we evolve to be able to communicate with each other so as to work together to achieve common goals. We also evolve to have tremendous potential to understand each other, identify with each other, and empathize with each other. Also, the idea of valuing other animals breaks down when taking it to its logical conclusion. Where do you draw the boundaries concerning which animals you value? Obviously, you won't want to value all insects or arachnids, so where do you draw the boundary? At vertebrates? At mammals? At primates? At those animals with some arbitrarily defined level of intelligence? There is no clear boundary to draw, and any non-human animals are going to be so far away in terms of our ability to connect with them that it seems preposterous to make the boundary anywhere but at the edge of being human. Another method to avoid continuing our current path towards certain destruction is for us to come up with a unifying goal, such as space exploration and colonization. Some bristle at the mention of colonization, but that's only because in the past it involved the abuse and bullying of other humans. I am not talking about abusing other humans or any other sentient creatures, but of improving the long-term prospects for survival and improvement of quality of life for all humans. Expansion into outer space could render moot all the discussion and hand-wringing regarding overpopulation and resource depletion. It should be something to consider. The last method I will mention is the creation of an entirely new way of looking at the world, at human relationships, and at the ethical rules we use to guide us. I discuss a possible foundation for such a new ethical philosophy in some detail at my website regarding Third Millennium Ethics that I link to on my YouTube channel description page.